Japan is on track to become the single largest international buyer of the F-35 in the world. 147 aircraft at a price tag approaching $46 billion. That's more than any U.S. ally on the planet. But originally, Japan didn't want the F-35, and it definitely didn't ask for some of the other Lockheed systems it ended up buying either. What you're about to see is the playbook Lockheed Martin ran to turn a skeptical, pacifist, constitutioned ally into its most important overseas customer. Since rebuilding its military after World War II, Japan has followed a doctrine called kokusenka. That's a Japanese term for domesticating military technology, licensing foreign designs, and building them at home through companies like Mitsubishi and Heavy Industries. The idea was never just about defense. It was about keeping Japan's aerospace industry alive, skilled, and capable of eventually developing its own platforms. Every fighter Japan has flown since the 1950s, the F-86, the F-104, the F-4, the F-15, was either licensed in Japan or had significant Japanese components. So when Japan launched its FX competition in the mid-2000s to replace its aging F-4 Phantom fleet, the question wasn't just, which jet performs best? The question was, which jet lets us keep our aerospace workers employed and our engineers building things? That requirement put the F-35 at a serious disadvantage, and the Eurofighter Typhoon Consortium was openly advertising full technology transfer and production partnerships. Boeing's AMI F/A-18 Super Hornet had an established track record and came in cheaper. The F-35, by contrast, was still deep in development hell, over budget, behind schedule, and the US government hadn't even cleared Lockheed to share sensitive technologies with Japan yet. By early 2011, Japan had narrowed the competition to 3 candidates: the Typhoon, the Super Hornet, and the F-35. Defense analysts inside and outside Japan were openly questioning whether selecting the F-35 made any sense at all. The Japanese industry lobbied against it. The aircraft's emphasis on strike-over-air superiority didn't match Japan's stated priority of defending its airspace. And the costs? Some estimates for the program's life cycle were eye-watering. But here's where it gets interesting. While Japan's procurement officials were doing their analysis, the strategic picture around Japan was changing fast. China unveiled its J-20 stealth fighter prototype in January 2011. The same month, a US defense secretary was visiting Beijing. That timing was not lost on anyone in Tokyo. Russia was also increasing its air incursions into Japanese airspace. Suddenly, Japan didn't just need a jet that could win an air-to-air fight, it needed one that could survive against stealth, and one that locked it into the most advanced combat network in the Western Pacific. That changed everything about how Japan weighed its options. Lockheed didn't win Japan's business by having the best jet on paper. They won it by making Japan an offer the other competitors structurally couldn't match. In October 2011, just 2 months before Japan's final decision, Lockheed significantly expanded the industrial participation offer it was putting on the table. The company proposed that Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries would perform final assembly and checkout of F-35A aircraft for the Japan Air Self-Defense Force. This wasn't minor subcontracting work. This was one of only 3 final assembly and checkout facilities, or FACO facilities, that Lockheed was establishing globally. 1 in the US, 1 in Italy, and 1 in Nagoya, Japan. For the Japanese industry, this was the difference between being a parts supplier and being an actual production partner. Mitsubishi would be assembling operational stealth fighters. IHI Corporation got engine assembly work. Other Japanese firms got subcomponent manufacturing roles. And critically, Japan was plugged into Lockheed's Autonomic Logistics Global Sustainment Network, making it the maintenance hub for F-35 operations across Northeast Asia. Japan's defense policy analysts had long feared that buying the F-35 off the shelf would mean total dependence on the US. No domestic capability, no leverage, no skill retention. Lockheed's offer directly addressed that fear. The Eurofighter consortium had offered technology transfer too. But Eurofighter couldn't offer Japan a seat inside the most sophisticated fifth-generation production and sustainment ecosystem in the world. That network is what Japan's industry leaders ultimately valued more than an independent licensed production deal. On December 20, 2011, Japan announced it had selected the F-35A, 42 aircraft initially, around $8 billion. Japan's defense minister framed it as a performance decision. Japanese industry understood it differently, as a managed entry into Lockheed's global supply chain with a pathway to expand. Drop your take in the comments. Was Japan's F-35 selection about national security, or was it really about keeping Mitsubishi's factories running? Let's see where people land on that. The F-35 was the headline, but the more revealing story of Lockheed's influence over Japan's procurement is what happened with a missile defense radar called the SPY-7. In December 2017, Japan decided to purchase 2 Aegis ashore batteries, land-based missile defense installations designed to shoot down ballistic missiles. This was a direct response to North Korea's accelerating missile tests. The system needed a powerful radar, and 2 were competing for the contract: Raytheon's SPY-6 and Lockheed Martin's SPY-7. The SPY-6 had a significant advantage on paper. It was already selected for the U.S. Navy's newest Arleigh Burke destroyers, the Flight 3 variant. It had been tested with actual radar hardware, and it used the same Aegis Baseline 10 software, meaning tighter interoperability with the U.S. Navy. The SPY-7 was newer, less proven, and based on a platform originally designed for missile defense, not the naval combat environment Japan was envisioning. Japan picked the SPY-7. The reported reason, according to Japan's Sankei Shimbun newspaper, was that Lockheed offered Japanese companies, specifically those working with gallium nitride semiconductor technology, production participation roles in the SPY-7 program. Once again, the industrial access offer was the swing factor. But here's the part that kept Japanese defense planners up at night. In June 2020, Japan canceled the entire Aegis ashore program. The stated reason was engineering, specifically, concerns that spent rocket boosters from the interceptors could fall on populated areas rather than into the ocean. Critics pointed to cost overruns and the rising price of the radar as contributing factors too. The SPY-7 contract was already signed. The radar was already being developed. Japan had sunk significant money and diplomatic capital into this system. What happened next is the clearest example of how a Lockheed-centered procurement can develop its own momentum. Rather than canceling the SPY-7 purchase and switching to an alternative, Japan pivoted. It decided to build 2 entirely new warships, now called Aegis System-Equipped Vessels, or ASEVs, specifically to carry the SPY-7 radar it had already bought for the land sites. These are not standard destroyers. No, they are 14,000-ton specialized missile defense ships, some of the largest surface combatants Japan has ever built. Total program cost for the 2 ships, approximately $7.1 billion, with the SPY-7 radar accounting for a substantial portion of that. By July 2025, Lockheed had delivered the first full ship set of 4 SPY-7 antenna arrays to Japan's Ministry of Defense. 2 ASEVs are now under construction by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Japan Marine United, but with commissioning targets in fiscal years 2027 and 2028. And in February 2026, Lockheed signed a contract with Fujitsu to build key radar power supply components inside Japan, deepening the industrial entanglement further. Japan started with a land-based missile defense requirement and ended up with two $3.5 billion. A piece warships designed around a radar the original project no longer needed. That's not a criticism. That the ASEV ships are arguably more strategically flexible than fixed land sites. But it illustrates exactly how deeply Lockheed systems have become woven into Japan's force structure planning. Here's a question for the comments. Would Japan have been better off switching to the SPY-6 after the Aegis ashore cancellation, or did the SPY-7 pivot produce a better outcome? Comment your analysis below. Let's return to the F-35. Because Japan's initial purchase of 42 aircraft was, in retrospect, just the opening bid, when Japan originally selected the F-35 in 2011, there was still a meaningful debate inside the Japanese defense establishment about whether it would eventually develop a true indigenous stealth fighter. The ATDX program, Japan's homegrown stealth demonstrator, which eventually flew in 2016 as the X-2 Shinshin, was still alive. The dream of a next-generation, domestically produced combat aircraft wasn't dead, but the F-35 integration deepened Japan's dependency faster than many expected. Once the FACO facility was operational in Nagoya, once Japanese industry was embedded in the sustainment network, once the first squadron stood up, the calculus shifted. In 2018, as China's military buildup accelerated and North Korea continued testing increasingly capable missiles, Japan's government announced it was expanding its F-35 buy by 105 additional aircraft, bringing the total to 147. And the 2018 decision added an entirely new variant to the mix, the F-35B, the short takeoff and vertical landing version. And this is where Japan's procurement story takes another unexpected turn. Japan ordered 42 F-35Bs, not for conventional air bases, but to operate from the decks of its Izumo-class ships, which were officially classified as helicopter destroyers. Those ships required structural modifications, reinforced decks, heat-resistant coatings to handle fixed-wing jets. Japan was, in effect, quietly building carrier aviation capability for the first time since World War II. The F-35B purchase wasn't something Japan set out to acquire a decade earlier. It emerged from the intersection of China's growing naval power, the availability of a platform that could make Japan's existing ships more lethal, and the fact that Japan was already a deep participant in the F-35 program's supply chain and maintenance network. Switching to a different platform would have meant walking away from all of that infrastructure. By July 2020, the U.S. State Department approved the full 105 aircraft expansion, a $23.1 billion deal, described at the time as the second largest foreign military sale in U.S. history. Japan is now, by every metric, the largest international operator of the F-35. Not a customer, an operator with its own FACO facility, its own MRO hub for Northeast Asia, and its own production partnerships embedded throughout the program. Step back and look at what Lockheed Martin actually did across these programs, and a clear pattern emerges. First, offer industrial participation early and expansively. Not just licensed production, actual integration into global supply chains, maintenance networks, and technology development pathways. The FACO facility for the F-35, the GAN semiconductor roles for the SPY-7. These offers give domestic industry a reason to lobby for the Lockheed system, not against it. Second, use allied interoperability as a strategic anchor. Japan's F-35s don't just operate in a Japanese bubble. They network with U.S. Air Force and U.S. Navy F-35s across the Pacific. That interoperability creates a switching cost. Moving away from Lockheed systems later means degrading the networked combat capability that makes these platforms valuable in the first place. Third, don't let geopolitics do the selling. Lockheed didn't have to manufacture a Chinese threat or North Korean missile program. Those threats were real, and they materialized on a timeline that made Japan's appetite for fifth-generation air and missile defense capabilities urgent. Lockheed had the right systems ready at the right moment and had already prepositioned the industrial relationships that made buying them politically feasible inside Japan. The result is a defense partnership that has made Lockheed deeply embedded in Japan's force structure, from air combat to missile defense to electronic warfare. The SEWIP system for naval EW was also sold to Japan across multiple domains simultaneously. So how did Lockheed convince Japan to buy weapons it didn't originally want? The short answer, they made the deal about Japan's industrial future, not just Japan's immediate military requirements. And they structured each sale so that saying no later became harder than saying yes up front. Here's what you need to remember as this story continues to develop. First, Japan's F-35 story is not over. The follow-on competition to replace the F-2, Japan's next indigenous fighter, now being developed as the FX under the Global Combat Air Program with the UK and Italy, will directly shape whether Japan can break some of this dependency or whether it deepens it. Lockheed tried to win that contract too in 2020, and Japan rejected its F-22/F-35 hybrid proposal. That rejection was Tokyo signaling it still intends to own its own aerospace future. Second, the SPY-7 is now the centerpiece of Japan's most ambitious shipbuilding program in decades. If those Aegis system-equipped vessels perform as designed, Japan will have one of the most capable sea-based missile defense systems in the world, capable of tracking hypersonic glide vehicles, ballistic missiles, and advanced cruise missiles simultaneously. If they don't, the cost of having bet on Lockheed's radar over Raytheon's will be felt for a generation. Third, as Japan's 2022 national security strategy makes clear, Tokyo is now actively building out indigenous defense production and export capability, including licensing PAC-3 missiles manufactured by Mitsubishi back to the United States to help replenish U.S. stockpiles. The student is starting to build its own supply chain. That changes Lockheed's leverage over time. So did Japan get played, or did it get exactly what it needed? The answer is probably both. Japan bought systems it hadn't originally planned for, often at higher cost than alternatives. But it also built industrial capability, cemented its alliance with the United States, and is now operating some of the most advanced air and missile defense systems in the world. The question now isn't whether Lockheed will try to sell Japan the next generation of systems. It's whether Japan will buy them on better terms.